Nurse Emily Carter had been on the trauma floor for exactly 11 days when the little girl grabbed her sleeve and refused to let go. It was Emily's first real posting after nursing school, the kind of assignment new hires prayed for and dreaded in equal measure, the military hospital wing, where the wounded came in broken and the families came in terrified. She had told herself she was ready. She had not been ready for this. The patient in room 214 was Petty Officer Jake Marlowe, a Navy SEAL pulled out of a black site operation 3 weeks earlier with a traumatic brain injury, 2 shattered ribs, and a body that seemed to fight its own recovery no matter what the chart said should be happening. He drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring names no one recognized, twitching at sounds only he could hear. His wife had died 2 years prior, a car accident according to the file, which left his 5-year-old daughter, Lily, as his only visitor. She came every afternoon in the same worn pink cardigan, dragging a stuffed rabbit with one ear chewed soft, and she sat in the corner chair swinging her feet, watching her father breathe like she was counting each one to make sure it wouldn't be his last. Emily liked Lily. She was quiet in the way that children who have already lost too much become quiet, watchful in a way 5-year-olds shouldn't have to be. So when Lily tugged her sleeve that Tuesday afternoon and pulled her down with surprising strength, Emily crouched without hesitation, expecting a request for juice, for the rabbit's other ear to be sewn back on, for anything ordinary. Instead, the girl cupped both small hands around Emily's ear and whispered, so softly it barely qualified as sound. "He hurts Daddy when you leave." Emily pulled back, certain she'd misheard. "Who does, sweetheart?" Lily's eyes, her father's eyes, storm gray and too old for her face, flicked toward the hallway, toward the nurse's station, toward the tall man in the white coat standing with his arms crossed just outside the glass, watching the room with an expression Emily could only describe as waiting. Dr. Marcus Reyes, head of the recovery unit, the man who had personally requested to oversee Marlowe's case, who signed off on medication adjustments at odd hours, who was, by every official measure, one of the most respected physicians in the building. "The doctor," Lily said, and then, as if the words cost her something physical, she added, "He comes in at night. Daddy gets scared. Daddy can't tell anybody because his mouth doesn't work right yet. But I heard him. I heard Daddy crying without making noise." A child's imagination, Emily told herself, standing so fast her knees cracked. Children invented monsters out of exhaustion and grief, and the particular helplessness of watching a parent lie motionless in a bed that smelled like antiseptic in fear. It happened all the time on this floor. She had been warned about it during orientation. Families under stress project onto shadows, onto staff, onto anything that gave their terror a shape they could point to. But Emily had also been trained to notice things, and once Lily planted the thought, she could not stop noticing. She noticed that Marlowe's morning labs sometimes didn't match the medication log from the night before. Small discrepancies, the kind easily explained by rounding errors or shift changes, except they only ever seemed to happen after Dr. Reyes had been alone in the room. She noticed that Marlowe's oxygen saturation dipped, inexplicably, always between 2 and 3 a.m., always on nights Emily wasn't scheduled. She noticed that Reyes never once asked Lily how she was doing, never crouched to her eye level the way every other doctor on the floor did instinctively, and instead looked at the child the way a man looks at an obstacle he hasn't yet found a way around. She noticed, most of all, that whenever she prepared to clock out, Reyes had a habit of appearing in the doorway of room 214 just moments later, as if he'd been listening for the sound of her footsteps leaving. That night, Emily did something she had never done in her short career. She volunteered for a double shift she wasn't assigned, telling the charge nurse she wanted the overtime. No one questioned it. New nurses always wanted the overtime. She spent the extra hours doing rounds that weren't hers, lingering near room 214 with a clipboard as a prop, watching the hallway the way Lily had watched her father breathe. At 2:14 a.m., Dr. Reyes walked into Marlowe's room carrying a small case that wasn't standard hospital equipment. Emily's pulse climbed into her throat. She stepped closer to the door, close enough to see through the narrow window, and what she saw made her blood go cold. Reyes wasn't checking vitals. He was leaning over the sedated SEAL, speaking low and fast, his hand pressed hard against Marlowe's throat. Not choking him, not yet, but testing, threatening, the posture of a man delivering a warning to someone who couldn't fight back and couldn't tell a soul. Emily's badge slipped from her trembling fingers, and clattered against the tile floor. Inside the room, Dr. Reyes went still. Slowly, he turned his head toward the door, toward the small window where Emily now stood frozen, and smiled, a smile with absolutely nothing kind in it. "Nurse Carter," he said, his voice carrying easily through the thin door. "You're up late. If you've made it this far, you already know this story is about to get a lot more dangerous. So before Chapter 2, do yourself a favor and hit subscribe, because what Emily uncovers next isn't just about one broken family. It's about how far a man will go to bury a secret a wounded soldier isn't supposed to remember. Emily didn't sleep that night, though she never told anyone why. She sat in her car in the hospital parking garage until 4 in the morning, replaying the smile on Dr. Reyes's face, the way his hand had rested on Jake Marlowe's throat like it belonged there, like he'd done it 100 times and expected to do it 100 more without consequence. She thought about report writing him up immediately. She thought about how new nurses who accused senior physicians of misconduct on their 11th day of employment tended not to make it to their 12th month. She thought about Lily, small and solemn in that pink cardigan, and how the girl had trusted her with the one thing that mattered more than anything else in her 5-year-old world. By morning, Emily had a plan, even if it terrified her. She started with the medication logs, pulling 3 weeks of records under the pretense of a routine chart audit. Something junior nurses did constantly, invisible paperwork nobody double-checked. What she found confirmed what her gut had been screaming. On every night Reyes had unsupervised access to room 214. Marlowe's sedation levels spiked well beyond what his chart authorized, followed by mysterious dips in oxygen that were logged as patient-related respiratory events, rather than medication side effects. It wasn't sloppy record-keeping. It was a pattern careful and deliberate, designed to look like a dying man's body failing on its own. Next, Emily did something riskier. She requested Marlowe's full service history through a contact she'd made in hospital administration, an older nurse named Dolores who'd worked the military wing for 2 decades and had learned, the hard way, which doctors to trust and which to watch. Dolores didn't ask why Emily wanted the file. She simply handed over a manila folder and said, "Be careful who you let hear you asking questions," which told Emily everything she needed to know about how long this had been happening under everyone's nose. The file revealed the piece that made the whole ugly picture snap into focus. 2 years earlier, Jake Marlowe had been part of a joint operation that went sideways, an operation Dr. Marcus Reyes had, before switching to civilian medicine, served in as a combat surgeon attached to the same unit. Classified reports suggested equipment failures and a botched extraction that cost 2 operators their lives. Failures that had quietly been pinned on faulty gear, rather than surgical error. Marlowe had been the only survivor who'd seen what really happened in that field hospital tent. Marlowe was the only man alive who could contradict the official story, if he ever regained enough cognitive function to testify. Reyes hadn't requested this case out of professional dedication. He'd requested it to make sure Jake Marlowe never woke up whole enough to remember, and never woke up at all if he got too close. Emily's hand shook as she photographed every page. She thought about walking straight to hospital security, but Dolores's warning echoed in her head. Reyes had authority, connections, years of built trust, and Emily had 11 days and a 5-year-old's whispered warning. She needed proof no one could dismiss as a rookie's overactive imagination. That night she returned for another unscheduled shift, this time with a small recorder tucked into her scrub pocket, the kind hospital security used for compliance audits, borrowed under a lie she'd have to answer for later. She waited in the supply closet across from room 214, watching the clock crawl toward 2 a.m., her heart pounding so hard she was sure it would give her away. Reyes arrived at 2:09. Through the cracked door, Emily watched him lean over Marlowe again, this time speaking clearly enough for the recorder to catch every word. A threat wrapped in medical jargon, a promise that tonight's dosage would be the one that finally resolved complications, a chilling admission that he'd been managing this loose end since the day Marlowe was airlifted stateside. It was, Emily realized with a jolt of adrenaline, a full confession, delivered to a man Reyes believed could never repeat it. He was wrong. Emily stepped out from the supply closet, recorder raised, security guard already moving down the hallway behind her. Dolores had made one more call just in case. Reyes's face went through disbelief, fury, and finally a kind of hollow resignation as 2 officers flanked the doorway. You don't understand what you're interfering with," he hissed as they cuffed him. But Emily understood perfectly. She understood that a little girl in a pink cardigan had noticed what a hospital full of trained professionals had missed, because she was the only one in that building who never stopped watching her father closely enough to see the truth. Jake Marlowe woke up 8 days later, weak but lucid, and the first face he focused on wasn't Emily's or the investigators who came to take his statement. It was Lily's, climbing onto the edge of his bed with her one-eared rabbit clutched tight, whispering something into his ear the same way she'd once whispered into Emily's. Nobody ever found out exactly what she said. Some things, Emily decided, belonged only to a father and his daughter. Reyes was arrested on charges of attempted murder and conspiracy tied to the cover-up of the failed operation, a case that eventually pulled 2 other officials down with him. Emily Carter, the rookie nurse who trusted a 5-year-old when the entire system told her not to, was later commended for her role in exposing the truth, though she always said the real credit belonged to a little girl who refused to stop watching, and to a stuffed rabbit that had heard more midnight confessions than anyone in that hospital ever knew. If this story moved you, you know exactly what to do. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because these are the kinds of true-to-life dramas we bring you every single week. Ordinary people who refuse to look away, and the quiet courage it takes to believe a child when no one else will.